My daughter texted me 5 minutes before the Uber was supposed to arrive at my door, and the words on the screen felt like a physical blow to my chest. You are not joining us. My husband thinks it's better to leave you behind, so we can actually enjoy our vacation. Just like that, 6 months of planning, $3,000 of my own savings, and the excitement of seeing my grandchildren see the ocean for the first time were stripped away by a text message. I was standing in my hallway with my suitcase packed, wearing my travel outfit, and holding a bag of snacks I'd prepared specifically for my grandkids, only to realize my own flesh and blood had decided I was an embarrassment or an inconvenience. How do you even respond to something like that when you've given everything to support them? I'm sitting here in an empty house while they are probably boarding their flight, and I have to ask you all honestly, was I wrong to do what I did next, or would you have demanded justice too? To understand how we got to this heartbreaking text, you have to understand the dynamic of my family over the last few years. My daughter, Chloe, has always been my world. After my husband passed away 5 years ago, I poured every ounce of my energy and my modest inheritance into making sure she and her husband, Mark, were taken care of. Mark has always been a bit of a high-flyer type, or at least he likes to think he is. He works in mid-level management, but carries himself like he's the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. He's obsessed with optics, luxury, and being around people he considers upper class. I, on the other hand, am a retired school teacher. I'm comfortable, but I'm not flashy. I shop at discount stores, I drive a 10-year-old sedan, and I value memories over labels. From the moment Chloe married Mark, I felt a shift. He started making little comments about my clothes, or the fact that I brought homemade casseroles to their house instead of ordering expensive catering. Chloe, instead of defending me, started to echo his sentiments. It started small, but it grew into a mountain of resentment that I tried my best to ignore for the sake of my 2 beautiful grandchildren, Leo and Maya. I remember one Thanksgiving specifically where Mark spent the entire dinner talking about his investment portfolio, while mocking the fact that I still used a flip phone until 2 years ago. Chloe just sat there, nodding along, laughing at his cruel jokes like she was auditioning for a role in a movie about people who forgot where they came from. I brushed it off because I didn't want to cause a scene in front of the kids, but the seeds of this betrayal were planted long ago. This vacation was supposed to be the big one. We were going to a luxury resort in Hawaii. Because Mark and Chloe were struggling with their mortgage after Mark bought a car he couldn't actually afford, a sleek European sports car that spent more time in the shop than on the road, I offered to pay for the entire villa and the airfare for all of us. It was my gift. I wanted those memories. I wanted to see Leo catch his first wave and Maya build a sandcastle that didn't just exist in a backyard sandbox. Throughout the planning process, Mark was incredibly pushy. He insisted on the most expensive excursions, the private chefs, and the first-class upgrades. He would send me links to 5-star restaurants where the tasting menu cost more than my monthly grocery bill, saying, "Mom, if we're doing this, we have to do it right. We can't look like tourists." I agreed to it all because I wanted them to be happy, and frankly, I thought it might finally earn me some respect in Mark's eyes. But as the departure date approached, the tension became unbearable. Mark started saying things like, "Maybe you should buy some new luggage, Mom. The stuff you have looks a bit haggard for a place like this." Or, "We're going to be meeting some of my business associates there, so try not to talk too much about your teaching days." He even suggested I stay in a separate, smaller room at the resort so they could have family time, despite the fact that I was the one paying for the 5-bedroom villa. The morning of the flight, I was up at 4 a.m. I had everything ready. I had bought the kids' little travel kits with coloring books and headphones. I had even paid for the airport transfer for all of us. Then the text came. It wasn't even a phone call. Chloe told me that Mark had a vision for this trip, and that having me there would change the vibe and make things complicated with the people they were meeting. She said they would send me pictures and that we could do a smaller, local trip later in the year. I was paralyzed. I called her 10 times, but she declined every call. I called Mark, and he blocked my number instantly. I was left standing in my foyer, surrounded by luggage, feeling like a discarded piece of trash. I spent 2 hours crying, wondering what I had done to deserve such cruelty. I looked at the little snacks I'd packed, Maya's favorite organic fruit strips and Leo's specific brand of granola bars. And I felt a wave of nausea. They weren't just leaving me behind. They were using me. They were flying first class on my miles, staying in a villa on my credit card, and planning to eat gourmet meals on my dime, all while treating me like a social leper. But then, the sadness turned into a cold, hard clarity. I realized that while they were off to enjoy the luxury I had funded, they had forgotten one very important detail. Everything, the villa, the flights, the excursions, was in my name and paid for with my credit card. So that was the situation I found myself in. I was abandoned at the doorstep while they headed to the airport to live high on my dime. I had to make a choice right then and there. Before I tell you the absolute chaos that unfolded at the airport and the resort, I want you to pause. Go down to the comments right now and tell me, if you had paid for a 5-figure vacation and were told you weren't allowed to go at the last second, what would you do? Would you let them go and deal with it later? Or would you take immediate action? I really want to know if my next move was too cold, or if it was exactly what they deserved. I didn't wait for a third hour to pass. I grabbed my laptop and got to work. First, I called the airline. Since I was the primary traveler and the one who purchased the group booking, I had full authority to make changes. I didn't cancel the kids' tickets. I couldn't do that to Leo and Maya, but I did cancel Mark and Chloe's first-class seats. I downgraded them to the very last row of economy, right next to the bathrooms, where the seats don't even recline. Then, I called the resort in Hawaii. I told them there had been a change of plans. I canceled the 5-bedroom luxury villa entirely. Instead, I booked myself a gorgeous single-occupancy oceanfront suite at a different, even more exclusive resort 5 miles down the beach. I also called the private car service that was supposed to pick them up at the airport in Honolulu, and told them the booking was void. Every call I made felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. I called the concierge who had arranged the private catamaran tour and the luau dinner. Cancelled. I called the equipment rental for the surf lessons. Cancelled. I knew they wouldn't find out until they tried to check in at tea. I called the equipment rental for the surf lessons. Cancelled. I knew they wouldn't find out until they tried to check in at the airport. I actually drove to the airport myself, not to catch the flight with them, but to watch. I sat in a corner of the terminal with a large coffee and a pair of dark sunglasses. I saw them walk in, looking all posh in their designer travel gear, laughing and taking selfies for Instagram. Mark was wearing a brand new linen suit that I'm sure he'd put on a credit card, acting like he owned the place. When they got to the kiosk to print their boarding passes, and realized they were no longer in first class, the look on Mark's face was priceless. He was screaming at the gate agent, waving his arms, demanding to see a manager. Chloe was frantically checking her phone, probably wondering why her VIP status had vanished. They had to walk past all the people they were trying to impress, and sit in the cramped back of the plane for 8 hours. I watched them board from a distance, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and sorrow. But that was just the beginning. When they landed in Hawaii, expecting a limo and a villa, they found nothing. My phone started blowing up with hundreds of texts. Chloe was screaming that the kids were tired, and they had nowhere to go. She sent me a video of Maya crying in the middle of the airport. It broke my heart to see the kids upset, but I knew that if I caved now, I would be their doormat for the rest of my life. Mark sent me a long email calling me malicious, unhinged, and a bitter old woman. I didn't reply. I was already sipping a cocktail on my private balcony at the other resort, watching the sunset over the Pacific. They ended up having to stay in a dingy, overpriced roadside motel, because everything else was booked solid for the season. Mark had to put it all on his already maxed out credit card. They spent their luxury vacation eating at fast food joints and sitting on a public beach because they didn't have the passes for the private areas. Meanwhile, I enjoyed the spa treatments and 5-star dinners I had originally planned for us all. I met a lovely group of retirees at the resort who actually appreciated my stories and my company. For the first time in years, I wasn't being hushed or judged. When they finally got back home, the fallout was massive. Chloe tried to come over and apologize, but her apology was more about how much money they lost and how embarrassed they were than about how they hurt me. I told her that until she realizes that she is a daughter before she is Mark's accessory, there is nothing to talk about. I explained to her that respect isn't something you can buy with someone else's money. Mark is threatening to sue me for emotional distress and breach of contract, which is hilarious considering there was no contract, only a mother's generosity that he spat on. He's even tried to turn the grandkids against me, telling them Grandma ruined the trip, but Leo is old enough to understand. He called me from his tablet and told me he missed me and that the motel smelled like old socks. That was the only confirmation I needed. I've decided to sell the house and move closer to my sister in another state. I'm taking my money with me, the money I had planned to leave to Chloe in my will. I've restructured everything. I love my grandkids, and I'll set up a trust for their education that Mark can't touch until they are 25. But as for my daughter and her husband, they are on their own now. They wanted to see what life was like without me bringing down the vibe. And now they get to experience it permanently. No more paying for their car repairs, no more funding their status lifestyle, and no more being the invisible backbone of their family. This experience taught me a very painful lesson about boundaries and self-worth. You can love someone with all your heart and give them the world, but you cannot allow them to treat you like a footstool just because they think they've outgrown you. I'm done being the ATM for people who are ashamed to be seen with me. I realize now that by spoiling Chloe and letting Mark walk over me, I was participating in my own mistreatment. No more. If you think I was right to cancel that trip and teach them a lesson in humility, please like this video. It helps me know I'm not alone in this struggle to find self-respect later in life. Subscribe to the channel for more stories where we stand up for ourselves and refuse to be silenced by the people we love the most. And please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Did I go too far by letting them fly all the way there only to find no villa? Or did the punishment fit the crime of leaving a mother on her doorstep with her bags packed? I'll see you all in the next story.